the man who stood perfectly still outside my bedroom window. I first noticed the man because the motion light flicked on, washing the yard in pale white, while I lay awake replaying the same thoughts that always pull me through long nights. He stood in the center of the grass, chin raised slightly, as if scenting the air for something he'd been hunting for years and had finally found beneath my window. At first I assumed he was just another neighbor wandering after midnight, but the way he didn't sway or blink told me this was someone who came here for me. I watched him through the gap in my blinds, thinking he'd eventually leave, but the longer he stayed motionless, the more my heartbeat tapped warnings across my ribs. The air felt too still, too careful, the way it does in old folklore stories, where something human-shaped waits for permission to move closer to your home. When I whispered from my phone, it felt like I was talking to the dark, afraid my voice might travel through the glass and invite him forward. I opened the camera app instead of dialing anyone, as if proof mattered more than help, though the lens trembled because my hands couldn't stay steady anymore. The screen zoomed in on his face, but it was angled upward slightly, as though he stared directly at my window, despite never shifting his head. His eyes seemed reflective, not glowing, but catching the light in a way I'd only seen in animals who watch without needing to breathe loudly or swallow. A cold draft brushed across my legs, though no window was open, and I wondered if he'd been standing there longer than I'd been awake. My phone dimmed, the screen sliding toward darkness, and for a moment the man's outline sharpened like he'd stepped closer, though I didn't hear a single sound. I locked the window quietly, pushing the latch down, but the click felt too loud, like a signal that I'd realized what he was, and that fear had finally set in. He didn't move, yet something in his posture tightened, as if he'd been listening the entire time and knew my sudden shift from observer to threatened. I felt watched in a way I hadn't since childhood, when my grandmother told me about silent men who lingered at windows to check whether a home still respected boundaries. The moment I turned away, the motion light blinked out, dropping the yard into a slow, suffocating dark that pressed against the window like a held breath. I stared into the black, seeing only faint outlines, wondering if he'd stepped directly beneath the glass where the light couldn't reach. The silence deepened, the kind that makes every old floorboard feel like it's waiting for something heavier than footsteps to climb the stairs. A tap touched the outer pane, soft and uncertain, like a finger testing the edge of a rule before deciding whether to cross it entirely. I froze, counting the seconds between each tap, listening for rhythm, hoping it was just a branch, even though there's no tree outside that wall. Another tap came, this one slower, as if something taller than me leaned forward to hear the way fear shifts in someone's breathing. I stepped back without meaning to, my heel brushing the carpet, as though trying to root me to a house that no longer felt like mine. My phone vibrated randomly some alert I didn't read, and the vibration lit the screen again, showing the faintest smudge on the glass from outside. It looked like the streak of a forehead pressed against the window, though no silhouette appeared behind it, nothing so simple as a person still standing. I backed into the hallway, keeping the window in my peripheral vision, but the dark stayed still, patient, almost expectant. My grandmother's words echoed. They only move when you stop watching, but I couldn't watch anymore, not when something was inches from the glass. I flicked on the hall light, hoping brightness would shift whatever rules governed this thing, but instead, the house shadows changed in subtle, wrong ways. The tapping stopped, replaced by a soft dragging sound moving downward, like nails trailing along the outer wall with careful, deliberate pressure. I whispered a quick promise to lock every door, every latch, anything that might discourage whatever waited below my bedroom window. As I reached the living room, the porch light blinked twice, and for one impossible second, I saw a tall figure standing on the other side of the frosted door. He didn't knock. He only leaned slightly, like he was checking whether I'd learned to pay attention to the right things, the old things, the watching things. And as I backed away, I felt that familiar instinct, an urge to warn someone else, because stories like this spread for a reason, and sharing them keeps you a little safer too. The lantern hand in my alleyway. I first saw it when I took the shortcut behind my building, a faint orange glow bouncing off the wet bricks that shouldn't have been there this late. A lantern hung from a figure, standing motionless at the end of the alley, its light swinging just slightly, enough to cast long, impossible shadows across the walls. I froze, convinced it was some drunk kid playing with an old lamp, but the posture was too straight, the way it held the lantern too deliberate. The closer I got, the more I realized the lantern wasn't ordinary. It glowed with a soft pulse, like a heartbeat someone had trapped inside the glass. The figure didn't move, yet its presence felt like it seeped into my chest, slow and careful, like a warning told in silence. I slowed my steps, hoping the shadows were tricks of the light, but the alley seemed to stretch unnaturally around it, folding in ways that made me dizzy. The lantern flickered once, and I heard a whisper, soft and low, carrying words I couldn't recognize, but understood somehow. Stay. I wanted to turn back, but my legs wouldn't respond, frozen in place while the figure remained perfectly still, watching, waiting. I took a careful step closer, and the lantern's glow seemed to stretch toward me, fingers of light reaching across the space like it could touch without moving. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, useless until I dared to raise it. The screen reflected the figure, perfectly still, but the light inside the lantern seemed brighter than the world itself. I tried to step sideways, to bypass it, but the alley felt narrower, the walls inching closer as if guiding me toward the figure instead of away. A second lantern appeared, dangling from the corner of the building, swinging in sync with the first, like some silent chorus following a rhythm I couldn't hear. The air smelled of smoke and damp wood, and I realized the smell came from the lanterns themselves, though there was no fire inside. I turned to leave, and the glow followed me along the wall, creeping ahead, retreating, moving in ways that should have been impossible. I stopped at the alley's mouth and glanced back, and for the first time I noticed the hand's pale, thin fingers, holding the lanterns with unnatural stillness, almost skeletal. The whispers returned, layered and overlapping, not in language, but in tone, warning, urging, begging in a cadence that made my stomach turn. I ran, not daring to look behind, hearing only the soft scraping of shoes or claws against the cobblestones. When I reached the street, the alley seemed empty, the lanterns gone, leaving only faint circles of light burned into the bricks where they had hovered. I thought I was safe, but in every reflective surface I passed afterward, I saw a faint orange glow, like it followed me through the city. At home, I checked the walls, the corners, the hallways, nothing. Just the lingering scent of burnt wood and something sweet I couldn't place. The next night, I heard it again, outside my window this time, a soft brushing and the faint creak of a lantern swinging just beyond the glass. I didn't look directly, but the shadow shifted, confirming what my mind had refused to. It had found me again. I tried to ignore it, sleep with the blinds drawn, the lights on, but the whispers grew louder, circling around the apartment like smoke. I couldn't escape. One morning, I found a small scrap of paper under my door, orange at the edges like it had been warmed by the lantern itself, with a symbol I didn't recognize drawn in charcoal. I burned it immediately, but the smell lingered, carried into my dreams where the figure and the lanterns waited in endless rows, motionless but watching. I started taking different routes to work, different paths at night, thinking movement might throw it off, but every reflective surface seemed to hold that same orange glow. Even the puddles reflected its light, even though the street lamps were far brighter, and the whispers followed, soft as a lullaby, cold as the alley brick. I considered leaving the city entirely, but the moment I imagined the lanterns far behind me, I saw the glow reflected in the train window, waiting, patient. I've learned to listen now, to the rhythm of the whispers, the sway of the glow, the pulse of the lanterns in the night. They want me to follow, but I don't know where, and I don't know why. All I know is that when the lanterns appear, it's too late to run. I only hope that sharing this story might anchor me somewhere, because the lantern hand will not wait forever. The smiling ditchers behind my apartment complex. I first noticed the smell before I saw them, something rotten and metallic drifting up from the alley behind my building. Then I saw the first one crouched low in the shadows, a figure hunched over, hands buried in the dirt, head tilting unnaturally toward me. Its smile was the first thing I noticed, stretching too wide across a pale, wet face, teeth crooked and sharp as if carved in haste. It didn't move, but the air around it pulsed with intention, like it had been waiting for someone to step too close. Another appeared behind it, then another, all crouched low, their grins gleaming in the faint light, each one smaller and more distorted than the last. I froze, my heartbeat a hammer in my chest, realizing that they weren't just standing there. They were observing, studying every small motion I made. The first one rose slowly, stretching its neck like a predator, savoring the moment before it pounces, yet keeping that impossible, wide grin. I wanted to run, but my feet felt heavy, rooted to the cracked asphalt under the alley's dim glow. The group began moving then, synchronized, creeping forward in the shadows, with a fluidity that felt both human and wrong. Their smiles never faltered, and I noticed the faint shimmer of mud and grime under their fingernails, the smell of damp earth clinging to them. One stepped closer, tilting its head to the side, exposing the dirt beneath its fingernails like a grotesque calling card. I swallowed hard, trying to keep calm, but the metallic stench grew stronger, a nauseating reminder that they left something behind wherever they went. The figures didn't speak, yet their eyes tracked me, glowing faintly under the streetlight, reflecting a knowledge that made my skin crawl. They moved toward the stairwell leading to my apartment, crouched low and silent, like shadows animated by the pulse of my fear. When I reached my door, they were gone from the alley, but the grin lingered in my mind, curling in the darkness of the stairwell behind me. I locked the door, checked every corner of my apartment, but the sense of being watched didn't dissipate. The next night, I heard digging outside again, soft, patient, like claws scraping the dirt in perfect rhythm. I peeked through the blinds and saw them lined up in the alley, each crouched in perfect silence, their eyes reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights. I noticed the first one held something small and black in its hand, tossing it lightly from one to the other as they moved in unison. The tossed object landed on the curb. It looked like a folded scrap of clothing, or maybe hair, but I couldn't tell. One figure stepped forward, paused, and the smile widened even further, the movement too deliberate to be human. I backed away from the window, heart hammering, and the figures didn't move, didn't blink, just waited, stretching the seconds into hours in my mind. When I finally slept, I dreamed of them crawling into my apartment, arranging my possessions into grotesque forms, smiling silently at each creation. I woke to find small, thin scratches along my hallway walls, perfectly straight, as if fingers had traced every step I took in the night. The smell returned, faint but unmistakable, like damp soil and rotting leaves, lingering in the corners of the rooms I had already checked. I tried to convince myself it was a nightmare, a hallucination from too many late nights, but the scratches weren't there before I slept. By the third night, they appeared again, crouched low on every shadowed stairwell, every dark patch outside, all smiling in perfect synchronization. I realized then that the smiling ditchers didn't just stalk. They left marks, signs, messages in the earth and the shadows, a silent trail I was never meant to follow. Now I avoid the alley, avoid the back exit, but I feel them watching, crouched low, grinning wide, always just out of reach. And I know that the moment I make a mistake, Even a small one, they'll appear closer than I expect, smiles gleaming, ready to mark me next. The keyhole men outside my bathroom door. I first heard them on a quiet Tuesday night, a soft tapping near the baseboards that I dismissed as the pipes settling in the old apartment. Then the tapping moved, slow and deliberate, tracing along the wall until it reached the bathroom door where I stood brushing my teeth. I leaned close, expecting to see a crack or warped wood, but instead I noticed a tiny hole near the hinge, something I swear wasn't there before. The air changed when I crouched down, colder, like something on the other side paused to greet me through that pin-sized opening. When I pressed my ear closer, I heard breathing thin, careful, and patient, like someone holding their face just inches from the keyhole. I backed away, toothbrush still in hand, realizing the hole wasn't naturally made. It was carved from the inside, smooth around the edges. The breathing followed me as I stepped back, adjusting slightly, like the presence behind it shifted position to keep listening. I covered the hole with tape, thinking that would be enough, but the tape bulged outward within seconds, as if something pressed from the other side. The tape peeled away in silence, falling gently to the floor, and the breathing returned, slower now, as though savoring the moment. I locked the door, but the noise didn't stop. Instead, fingers traced the wood along the bottom edge, scratching tiny symbols I didn't recognize. I sat awake in the hallway, listening to the faint whispers drifting through the keyhole, a language dry and fragmented like shredded paper. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of eyes pressed to hundreds of keyholes, watching me from every direction, unblinking and impossibly calm. The next morning, the hole had multiplied 3 more lining the door, arranged in a perfect triangle, each one carved clean with surgical precision. Tiny flakes of wood dusted the tile floor beneath them, as if the work had been done moments before I woke. I covered all the holes with layers of tape and plastic, securing them tightly, but the coverings began to pulse outward, pushed by unseen pressure. At night, I heard whispering again, but this time it came from every hole at once, a chorus of thin voices murmuring in perfect synchronization. I pressed my back to the opposite wall, listening to the cadence, hoping it would fade, but the murmurs only grew clearer, more focused. One whisper drifted louder than the rest, forming a single word I understood: closer. The holes widened overnight, just enough for a fingertip to slip through if something wanted to, though nothing did not yet. When I peered at them, the breathing grew loud, excited, like the watchers knew I was finally looking directly back. I shoved a towel under the door, sealing the bottom edge, but something tugged at it lightly from the other side, testing how firmly I wedged it. My phone light flickered as I aimed it toward the door, and in that brief flash, I saw shadows shifting behind every hole. I stepped away slowly, trying not to make noise, and the tugging at the towel stopped instantly, replaced by perfect stillness. Hours passed before I heard movement again, soft shuffling like feet dragging along the tiles outside the bathroom. Then a new sound, metal scraping gently, like a thin blade carving again, adding another hole someplace I couldn't see. I searched the walls of my apartment and found one tiny opening near the front door, drilled low, almost hidden in the molding. Then another in the living room, one in the bedroom doorframe, each smooth-edged and fresh, as though carved minutes before I discovered them. By morning, the whole apartment felt perforated, dozens of tiny watching points aimed inward, each one warm around the edges from recent carving. The whispers came from all directions now, gentle and curious, murmuring through the holes with childlike fascination. I sleep with lights on, but the light doesn't change anything. They don't care about brightness, only proximity, only attention. I don't know what they want, only that they're patient, carving closer each night, learning the layout of my home one tiny opening at a time. If you ever find a hole in your wall that you swear wasn't there before, don't look through it, because once they know you're aware, They never stopped making more. The wallpaper watcher in my living room walls. I first noticed the shape on a Sunday night. A faint bulge beneath the old wallpaper in my living room that pulsed softly like it was breathing. The apartment was silent, but the wallpaper shifted in tiny waves, as if someone pressed their face gently from the other side, just to test the material. I stood still, watching the pattern ripple, trying to convince myself it was the draft from the cracked window, but the movement was too rhythmic. When I stepped closer, the floral print seemed to warp around the bulge, the petals stretching wide as if pulled towards something underneath. A soft dragging sound followed, slow and deliberate, moving from one corner of the wall to the other, like fingertips tracing the inside of the plaster. I put my hand against the wallpaper, expecting it to feel firm, but the section dipped inward slightly, warm like living skin. I jerked back, heart pounding, and the bulge retreated instantly, sliding upward behind the patterns with unnatural grace. That night, the sounds grew louder, scraping, dragging, thin taps echoing between the studs, like someone crawling through the narrow spaces within the walls. At one point, I heard breathing, shallow and cautious, coming from directly behind the wallpaper near the bookshelf. I pressed my ear against it and froze when a soft whisper vibrated against the wall, gentle enough to feel like it was meant only for me. I moved the bookshelf away, revealing a long vertical stretch where the wallpaper sagged slightly, as if something leaned against it from the other side. The pattern curved around a shape, forming the vague outline of a shoulder and a head, frozen in place but unmistakably human. When I stepped back, the shape slid sideways, vanishing into the darker part of the wall where the plaster seemed uneven. I barely slept, and when morning came, new distortions appeared, small bumps scattered across the walls, like knuckles pressing from underneath. One bump pulsed in steady rhythm, slow and relaxed, as if the thing inside the walls slept lightly behind only a thin sheet of wallpaper. By noon, I heard faint humming weaving through the studs, a low, tuneless vibration that traveled from wall to wall like it was mapping the space. I turned on the TV just to drown it out, but the humming matched the sound, adjusting pitch with every change in volume. When I tried peeling a corner of the wallpaper back, something tapped from the inside 3 soft knocks in a calm, warning cadence. The wallpaper shifted then, moving independently of the wall behind it, rolling slightly like fabrics, stirred by a breeze that didn't exist. That night, I couldn't ignore the silhouette forming again taller this time, standing directly behind the wallpaper as though facing into my living room. Its head tilted slowly, the wallpaper stretching tight over whatever face pressed outward, the floral pattern bending around an unseen grin. I whispered for it to stop, and the movement paused instantly, as if it could hear me with perfect clarity through the thin layer. Then something traced my name along the wall from the inside, dragging slowly across the wallpaper in looping, uneven letters. I knocked once against the wall just to prove to myself it was real, and something knocked back immediately, mimicking the exact rhythm. The next morning, the entire room felt claustrophobic. The wallpaper puffed outward in dozens of spots like bubbles ready to burst. One spot near the ceiling expanded and contracted, breathing slowly, exhaling faintly enough to stir the dust on top of the cabinets. I tried calling maintenance, but the moment I mentioned the walls moving, the call cut out, replaced by soft static that hummed in the same rhythm as the thing behind the wallpaper. At sunset, the walls grew restless, rippling in long waves as if something large crawled behind them, stretching the wallpaper thin over shifting forms. It pressed its face forward again, closer than ever, so close I could see the exact contours of its nose, its lips, the hollow outline of its eyes. The floral pattern distorted into a grotesque mask over its features, petals blooming where its cheeks would have been. I backed away slowly, but the face followed, sliding through the wall with liquid smoothness, keeping its features pressed tight beneath the wallpaper. I could hear its breathing clearly, now soft, steady, like it had been waiting years for someone to live here long enough to notice. It whispered again, a sound like paper tearing underwater, and the wallpaper above its head fluttered as though responding. I sleep on the couch now with all the lights on, but the walls still shift, still hum, still breathe around me in patterns that feel intentional. I've learned not to touch the wallpaper, not to peel it, not to acknowledge the movements unless absolutely necessary. Because the wallpaper watcher reacts to attention, and every night it presses closer, learning the shape of my rooms, then the shape of me.